team. Now that you've been introduced to the idea that the economy can be modeled and that the complicated transactions and choices that producers and consumers make can be simplified by a model, there's another model which it's time to learn, which is called the circular flow model. And what I recommend you do is that you add these notes into your notes so that as I'm creating the circular flow model here, you can be adding it to your notes, and then you can have it in case you have any questions. We've already realized that the sort of centerpiece of the economy are the factors of production: land, labor, capital. That's all the stuff that's used to make stuff. And then the risk-taking ideas. And we know that if these factors of production go in one direction, that then rent, which is what we pay for land, wages, which is what we pay for labor, interest, which is what is paid for capital, and profit, which is what is due the entrepreneur, must flow forward. Well, who owns the land, the labor, the capital, and the entrepreneurship? That's owned by households. They provide the factors of production, and those factors of production go to the firms who use them. What would we say that the firms use the factors of production for? Well, they use it for goods and services. A bakery might need to rent its space, pay its workers, pay for its ovens and raw materials, and pay back its entrepreneur. Once it has these aspects, it can provide cupcakes. Those cupcakes will be purchased by the household, and the household will, in turn, send money. Down to the firms. So we can see here the way in which money flows from the households to the firms and then flows back from the firms to the households in the forms of rent, wages, interests, and profits. Meanwhile, the labor and materials of the economy flow from the households down to the firms and then are turned into the goods and services that the firms sell back to the households. This, then, is the simple version of the circular flow model of the economy, which shows how goods and services can be paid for as they are created from the land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, which is originally owned by households. This simple model of the economy is a little bit like a glass jar that has been sealed with some sand and some dirt and perhaps some plants and some water. And as this terrarium, there we can see the water cycle, which goes around and around, and we can see the plants absorb the water and then respirate the water. A similar idea is used in the metaphor here for the circular flow model. But it's not quite accurate just yet. There are a few more complicated aspects because households do not just buy goods and services. Households also pay taxes. And they pay those taxes to the government. The government, in turn, may buy some of its goods or services from firms. The government may pay for the construction of bridges. It may pay teachers. And so we can say here that any government spending can be returned to firms. Taxes come in and government spending goes out. The government has no need for money in its own right, and so governments generally spend all of the money they take in taxes, sometimes even more. Households also can choose to save their money. And generally, they're going to save their money in banks. The banks then lend this money back into the firms in the form of investment or lending, which the firms can use to expand. So once again, we have our same circular flow model, but it's a bit larger. One more final complicating piece. Firms send some of their goods and services out of the country in what we call exports. And they receive foreign currency for those exports, which can come into the firms. So that's an additional addition of money which can come into the economy. Households may not buy all of their goods and services from domestic firms. They may choose to import some of those goods and services. And so they will send their currency out into the world. Now might be a nice time to pause for a moment and note that taxes always balance with government spending, and savings balances with investment and lending. But there is not a guarantee that imports and exports are going to balance. And so, one of the major jobs of a government that we'll actually discuss much later in the course is to balance imports and exports so that this circular flow model can keep flowing. This is the model, and this is the model as you need to understand it. The relationship between rent and labor, between rent and land, wages and labor, interest and capital, profit and entrepreneurship, between savings and investment and lending, and between taxes and government spending, and the unequal relationship between imports and exports. Now, just to be fully clear, firms could save money with banks too, and they often do. And firms could pay taxes to the government. In fact, they're required to. So even now, we can see our simplified model here. But this model, even in its simplicity, is able to show us some important aspects of the economy. As saving rates increase, household spending can temporarily decrease, but eventually that will be returned to the circular flow, just the same way that snow can hold on to the water in the water cycle, but eventually will melt. If the government increases taxes, that can reduce spending in the short run, but in the long run, it will return in the form of government spending. This simple model provides a lot of information about the economy and will be an important aspect of our studies when we consider the relationship between banks, firms, households, the government, and even foreign countries.